Welcome to EduPlanet 21's 10-Minute Tuesdays, weekly conversations with experts in education. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Bea McGarvey, author, consultant, and educational leader who proudly and passionately works with schools and districts on transformation to realize a new vision for education. Bea, welcome to our 10-Minute Tuesdays.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be with you.
So can you start out just by introducing yourself and talking a little bit about the Mass Customized Learning Institute?
Sure. I'm a teacher. I taught elementary school. I taught second and fifth grade. I was also a guidance counselor and an administrator at the middle school level. And I also worked at the district level as executive director of education in the area of curriculum and instruction. And then for, I think it's maybe about 20 years or so, I've been doing consulting and working around the country. I worked at Marzano Research Lab for a while, helping teachers and principals to understand the research on learning. And along the way, I came upon this wonderful colleague and friend of mine, Chuck Schwan. So we formed this wonderful professional relationship. And over the years, I came to realize that no one talks about the things that are really tying the hands of wonderful educators. And it's all about the time-based educational system that we inherited in 1892. So he and I started to kind of think about that, recognizing that that's what prevents teachers from going further with the things that they want to do. And the other thing that happened at the time is that our world became customized. We were experiencing customization from Amazon about the books that, they know the books that I like, or iTunes, I kind of get directed to, Pandora, the kind of music that I like. And we would say, man, how do they do that? And gosh, the world, it's kind of embarrassing now because the world is customized, but we don't customize learning. And so that's where it all began for us to say, we're at the point now where we can customize learning for kids. And so we just started to put our thoughts into this book called Inevitable Mass Customized Learning. Lo and behold, a lot of teachers are saying, I could have written this book. This is exactly the vision that I've been trying to get to. So that's how Chuck and I came together to write this book. And now I'm putting all of what we learned in working with districts around the country into the MCL, Mass Customized Learning Institute.
Talk a little bit more about what your vision is. What is the MCL vision?
Yes, the vision very simply is that we want every kid, not just a few kids and not just a batch of kids, but every single kid to come to school every day and be met where he is in his learning progression. And he's working in content that's interesting to him in his learning preference, and he's successful and he wants to come back to school the next day. The key is we added this little adjective a couple of years into working this vision, and we added the adjective simultaneously. So what we're saying, because what was happening is people were saying, well, we'll batch most of the kids, and for those kids that need something, we're going to put them over here. And for these kids, we're going to put them over here. And we're not, no. That's not what the vision is. The vision is that every kid simultaneously is met at his learning level and can progress through his learning at his own pace. So a vision needs to be out there. So people need to understand that if right now we said, gosh, could we pull that off by October? We'd say, So a vision needs to really pull you. It kind of needs to take your breath away. You need to say, man, wouldn't that be something if we could do that? And so that's what mass customized learning is. It's a vision. It's out there. It's pulling us. It's something to work toward, which is very different in education. So this is a different paradigm.
So how does an educator, a learning community, how do they know that they're ready to make this shift? Because it's a big shift.
Yeah, it's kind of a brewing that kind of happens in a learning community, in a school district. What happens is that you have leaders. First of all, you have to have strong leadership at the district and at the school level. But what happens is people begin to kind of come together in a critical mass to say we need to do something differently. And a lot of places, what they do is they start with just kind of creating a little disequilibrium by, doing some book studies, looking at the One World Schoolhouse, Start with Why, Growth Mindset. I mean, there are a lot of books that you can start reading that they start rattling at the old system. You start saying, man, gosh, reading about this it's not congruent with what we're doing. So I think that's one way that people begin. Another way is that to bring the community together. And we actually recommend this kind of early on, that you bring about 100 stakeholders together, teachers, students, parents. You want, the head of the hospital, the guy at the service station, the nurse so you want all kinds of people, stakeholders from the community coming together. And it's usually a 2-day process where they then define where they want to go, what they want this vision to be. Because we educators don't own the schools. The community owns the school. And what happens is you create this covenant. It's very powerful. And then what happens is that the school board, the Board of Education, then adopts it and votes on it. And then it's kind of our marching orders as workers in a school district. This is what the community is saying. Now, what's interesting is that process is kind of labor intensive. But the irony is when we do that all over the country, everyone pretty much says the same thing. I mean, everyone, if you ask any parent, any teacher, any learner himself, they really are saying, I just want you to know my kid. I want you to know how he learns. I want him, he came to you as a 5 and 6-year-old and he loved learning. I want him to leave 12 years later, loving learning and just anxious to keep learning and developing himself. I mean, it's the same thing. I want him to, read and write and all of those. But they also bring into the mix a lot around thinking. I want them to be able to, problem solve. And those are all a lot of 21st century skills, habits, certain habits of mind. The interesting thing is everyone says the same thing, but there's power when you bring 100 people from the community and you create that covenant together. So that's another way that people start.
We have a lot of teachers who listen to our weekly recordings, our 10-minute Tuesdays, and one of the things we hear from them is they like tidbits. What are some things very practical that they could put into place? Maybe they're not in a learning community that is fully ready to embrace MCL, but they want to start implementing some strategies or some things in their own classroom. Do you have some suggestions of some things that they could do?
So first thing I would recommend is to get with a couple other teachers or learning facilitators that have a like mind, that you can kind of work together and share the load. This work has to be that we have to, so there might be 3 of us and there's 75 learners, you kind of get a different perspective. I mean, if it's just me and 25 or 30 learners, I'm kind of overwhelmed with thinking that I can begin to meet the individual needs of 30 learners. But now if I'm thinking, okay, there are 3 of us, there's 75, 80 learners, okay, the possibilities begin to emerge that I go, gosh, why don't you take all the kids who need to learn how to divide fractions, and I'll take the kids that need to learn place value. So that is one way to begin. Here's another way, and if you're by yourself, it also works better if you're in a team. Start looking at the learning goals that you have. What's the learning goals that we want the learners to get around this particular part in their learning progression? The kids don't need the teacher to teach them details, let's say about the Civil War. They need them to teach about oppression. So do you see how that's a different concept that requires thinking and dialogue and back and forth conversations with learners? So let's outsource all the low-level, literal kind of stuff to technology. A lot of teachers say, I'm worried about technology. I'm worried it's going to replace me. And my response to that is, if you're teaching low-level, kind of literal content knowledge, I'd be worried. I'd be worried because they don't need a teacher for that. They can learn it over here in a video game that's way more engaging. But what they do need the teacher for are those conceptual, complex reasoning, problem solving. So taking that knowledge and applying it, seeing patterns, that's what they need the teacher for.
So before we close up this conversation, I just wanted to give you a minute to talk about your Learning Path series. We worked together on the MCL Institute and putting together some Learning Path series. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the first series are a group of learning paths around shifting the mindset. And so it gives you the foundational information to answer some of the questions that you've been asking me. Where do we begin? How do we create this pull? How do we create this sense of urgency among our stakeholders? One of the pieces in that I love, and I've always started with this, is the research on motivational theory. So getting a common language and a common understanding of what the research says about motivation, that's one of the things in shifting the mindset.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me today, Bea, and I look forward to our future conversations.
My pleasure, Claire. Thank you.